The afternoon sun beat down on the asphalt as Karen pulled into Riverside Shell, her hands already trembling with irritation. She'd been up since 5 a.m. dealing with her daughter's college application disaster, her boss's unreasonable demands, and now a $200 car repair estimate that made her stomach turn. She didn't have time for this. She didn't have time for anything anymore. The pump clicked to life as she swiped her debit card. Premium. $20. Her mouth tightened as she watched the numbers climb. 25. 30. The gauge was barely a quarter full, and she'd already pumped in $28. Something felt wrong. She stopped at 35 and screwed the cap back on, muttering under her breath. The numbers didn't add up. They never added up, but this time felt different. This time felt deliberate. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed with a sickly brightness that made her head pound. The young clerk, couldn't have been more than 20 with purple streaks in his hair and a nose ring, barely looked up from his phone as Karen approached the counter. The sight of his apathy ignited something primal in her chest. "Excuse me." Her voice came out sharp, cutting through the convenience store silence like a blade. "I need to speak to a manager." The clerk's eyes lifted slowly, annoyance flickering across his features. "Manager's in back." "Hold on." Karen's jaw clenched. "Hold on." As if she had nothing better to do, as if her entire life wasn't falling apart piece by piece, and now someone was literally stealing from her at a gas pump. The manager appeared. Within 2 minutes, a stocky man in his 50s with receding hair and the weary expression of someone who'd heard every complaint under the sun. His name tag read, Doug. "What can I help you with today?" Doug's tone was professional but flat, the voice of a man performing his job function rather than genuinely engaging. "I was charged twice for gas," Karen said, each word clipped and precise. "I put in $35 and my bank statement shows 2 charges. $35 each. That's $70 for half a tank. Do you understand how insane that is?" Doug's expression didn't shift. "Ma'am, that does happen sometimes. Usually it's a processing delay. The second charge will drop off in—" "I don't want to hear about processing delays," Karen interrupted, her voice rising. People in the store were starting to glance in their direction. She didn't care. She was done caring about what people thought. "I want my money back today, now." "I understand your frustration," Doug said, and there was something in the way he said it that practiced sympathy, that corporate-mandated empathy, that made Karen's blood pressure spike. "But without seeing your statement, I can't verify. I have my phone right here." Karen thrust her phone toward him, screen illuminated with her banking app. 2 charges, 3:47 p.m. and 3:49 p.m., 2 minutes apart. I was only at the pump for maybe 3 minutes total. How is that possible unless your system is broken or your clerk, she glared at the young man by the register, is doing something he shouldn't be? The clerk's face flushed crimson. "I didn't do anything. I was inside the whole time." "Exactly my point," Karen snapped. "The pump did it. Your pump scammed me." Doug held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Ma'am, I hear you, but these things really do resolve themselves. The bank will see it's a duplicate charge, and I'm not waiting for the bank to fix your problem." Karen's voice had become a low, dangerous hiss. She'd passed angry. She was now in that territory beyond anger, that place where the entire world felt like it was conspiring against her, where every slight and injustice crystallized into a single point of white-hot certainty. "I want this resolved now. I want to speak to corporate. I want to know why your gas station is stealing from customers, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows about it." Doug's expression finally changed. A flicker of something, irritation, defensiveness. He straightened, and when he spoke again, his tone had cooled several degrees. "Look, I can't give you cash without documentation, but what I can do is pull up the security footage from your transaction. If there's a system error, it'll show on the record. We can both see it together, and then we'll figure out what needs to happen." Karen felt a surge of triumph. Finally, someone was taking her seriously. Good, that's all I wanted. "Let's see the footage." Doug gestured for her to follow him toward the back office. The clerk remained behind the counter, his earlier apathy replaced with something that looked like genuine anxiety. Karen didn't spare him another glance. The office was small and cluttered, filing cabinets, a desk stacked with papers, and a monitor showing feeds from multiple angles around the store and pump area. Doug settled into the desk chair and began clicking through a computer mouse, navigating to files marked with today's date and timestamps. "Here we are," he said, pulling up footage from 3:45 p.m. "This is from Pump 5, where you said you were." The video showed the area in grainy color, the pump island, a slice of the street beyond, and a clear view of the pump console itself. Karen watched as her own car pulled in, watched as she got out and approached the pump. She saw her hand slide the card. She saw the screen light up. Then she saw something else. Her heart stopped. The video showed the transaction completing. $35. The pump dinged. Her car was already pulling away. The timestamp read 3:47:32 p.m. Then nothing happened. There was no second charge, no mysterious duplicate transaction. The pump sat empty for the next 2 minutes and 7 seconds until the footage ended. Karen's mouth went dry. She opened it to speak, but nothing came out. Doug turned to her slowly, his expression completely neutral. But his eyes held something that looked disturbingly like pity. "Would you like to see the footage from your bank?" he asked quietly. "I can pull up our end of the transaction records. They'll show your card was only swiped once. Your bank will show the same thing when you call them. A single charge of $35 at 3:47 p.m. Karen's vision blurred. Her hands felt numb. "But before you leave," Doug continued, his voice carrying a new weight, "there's something else you should probably see." He clicked through more footage. Different angle. Different time. Earlier that morning, Karen watched herself. Watched her own car pull in at 8:23 a.m. Watched herself pump gas. Watched herself re-enter the store and approach a different register where a different clerk was working. She watched her own mouth moving. Watched the clerk's confused expression. Watched the exchange escalate until finally the clerk handed her cash she definitely didn't deserve, and Karen walked out with $30 of store money in her hand. The room seemed to tilt. "Sideways! You were in here this morning, too," Doug said, his tone not accusatory, simply factual. "You told that clerk you'd been charged twice before. He felt bad and gave you the refund without verifying. This is the third station you've hit this week, according to the network reports." Karen couldn't breathe. "So here's what's going to happen," Doug said, turning back to face her fully. "You're going to leave this store. You're going to drive away, and you're going to think very carefully about what kind of person you want to be. Because right now, you're the scammer." The words hit like physical blows. Karen's face drained of all color. Her mind spun, searching for an exit, a justification, anything. But there was only the truth, crystallized on that screen, making her complicity impossible to deny. The worst part wasn't the shame. It wasn't even the humiliation. It was the moment she realized she didn't remember being the person who would have walked away from this store with integrity intact. She couldn't pinpoint when she'd become someone who justified theft, someone who bullied teenagers and manipulated tired managers. But the footage didn't lie. She had. Karen's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel. The parking lot swam in her peripheral vision. She needed to leave, needed to disappear, but her body felt disconnected from her brain, as if she was piloting herself through a dream she couldn't wake from. Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter. "Mom, where are you? I need to talk about the college thing." The college thing. Right. The application disaster that had sent Karen into this spiral this morning. She'd been so angry at her daughter for throwing away her future with mediocre essays. So certain that everyone around her was either incompetent or working against her. Karen pulled out of the parking lot slowly, her mind fragmenting into 1,000 pieces. The thing was, and this was what made her stomach churn with a sickness that went deeper than embarrassment, she'd known. Somewhere in the dark corners of consciousness, she kept locked away, she'd known what she was doing. The first time she'd claimed a duplicate charge at a Chevron outside the city, she'd felt that little thrill of adrenaline. The gamble. The high of getting away with something. The second time at a speedway, she'd felt something different, a kind of numb inevitability, like she was watching someone else do it. But the third time, this morning at a different Shell station, when she'd lied to that clerk who looked barely old enough to shave, she hadn't felt anything at all. That was the real horror, the complete absence of feeling. Just mechanics, just execution. Karen had read an article once about how people rationalize bad behavior, how the brain constructs these elaborate justifications that feel absolutely true in the moment. She'd felt superior reading that article, certain she wasn't one of those people. She was better. She paid her taxes. She loved her daughter. She'd never broken a real law. But what were these last 3 days exactly? What were they if not real? Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her boss. "Karen, we need to talk about your performance review." "Call me." She'd been snapping at people at work. She knew that. Just last week, she'd made an intern cry by tearing apart his presentation in front of the entire department. The intern had actually been competent. She'd just been having a bad day. No, worse. She'd been looking for a reason to be angry. When had that started? When had she become someone who hunted for grievances like a predator stalking prey? Karen pulled into her driveway and sat in the car. The house looked the same as always. The modest 3-bedroom with the garden she hadn't touched in months. The willow tree in the front yard that had lost half its branches. Everything looked normal. Everything looked fine, but nothing was fine. She thought about her ex-husband, Marcus. They'd divorced 3 years ago. She'd spent 2 of those years telling anyone who'd listen that Marcus was selfish, that he'd refused to help during her mother's illness, that he'd been emotionally unavailable and dismissive. All of it was technically true. All of it was also missing something crucial, the part where Karen had stopped communicating with him. The part where she'd decided his grief about her mother's death wasn't real enough, wasn't expressed the right way. The part where she'd weaponized his quiet introversion against him until he had no choice but to leave. Had he actually been the villain? Or had she simply been so convinced of her own righteousness that she'd made it impossible for him to be anything else? Karen got out of the car and walked to her house on shaking legs. Inside, her daughter Melissa was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as Karen entered, and the worry in her eyes was so immediate, so genuine, that it physically hurt to see. "Hey," Melissa said carefully. "You okay? You look kind of—" "The essays?" Karen interrupted. She needed to say this before she lost her nerve. "Your college essays, they're not mediocre. I was wrong." Melissa's expression shifted to confusion. "What, you haven't even read them yet?" "I know. And I shouldn't have judged you before I did. I shouldn't have—" Karen's voice cracked. She steadied it. "I've been really harsh with you lately, and I think it's because I'm angry at myself, and I've been taking it out on you. That's not fair. That's not okay." Melissa set her phone down slowly. "Is this about something? Did something happen?" Karen sank into one of the kitchen chairs. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw someone trying so hard to navigate the world with kindness intact. Someone who still believed in fairness. Someone who hadn't yet learned how to justify her own darkness. "I lied to you," Karen said quietly, "about a lot of things. Not just the essays. I've been lying to you about how I see you. I've been critical in a way that wasn't honest. It was just mean. Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Karen pulled out her phone. She opened her banking app and turned the screen toward Melissa. "I've made some really poor choices recently, and I got caught. And now I need to fix it." She explained everything. The gas stations, the progressive dishonesty, the mounting pile of small deceptions that had accumulated until she'd lost track of who she actually was. Melissa listened without interrupting, her young face growing older with each sentence. When Karen finished, Melissa was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "Are you going to turn yourself in?" The question landed like an anvil. Turn herself in? Report herself to the gas stations? Potentially face criminal charges? The thought made Karen's survival instincts scream in protest. She could still walk away. She could, but then she saw it in Melissa's eyes. The question wasn't just a question, it was a test. Not of Karen, but of herself. Would her mother teach her that consequences only mattered if you got caught? Or would she teach her that integrity meant doing the right thing even when no one was watching? Yes, Karen heard herself say. I am. Melissa nodded slowly. Okay, I think that's the right thing. Karen wanted to tell her daughter that she was proud of her for accepting this, for not trying to minimize what Karen had done. But that would be taking credit, and she'd done enough taking. So instead, she just said, I need to make some phone calls. The first call was to the Shell station manager. Doug? He answered on the third ring, and Karen could hear the surprise in his voice when he recognized her. I want to file a formal confession, Karen said without preamble. And I want to cooperate fully with any investigation. I also want to pay back what I took, with interest. There was a long pause. Then Doug said something she wasn't expecting. You know I could press charges? Yes, Karen said. I know, another pause. She could hear him breathing, could feel the weight of the decision being made on the other end of the line. Let me transfer you to corporate, Doug finally said. This is above my pay grade. But Karen, I'm kind of glad you called back. After the transfer, after the corporate representative told her they'd need statements and documentation, after she'd provided information about the other two stations and promised full cooperation, Karen hung up and sat in the silence of her house. The doorbell rang at 6:47 p.m. Two police officers stood on her porch, faces neutral and professional. They'd received a report about fraudulent activity. They needed to ask her some questions. Karen invited them inside. As she answered their questions, provided her banking information, and signed forms, she felt something strange happening in her chest. It wasn't relief. That would come later, maybe. Right now, it was something more like exhaustion. Like finally putting down a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten what it felt like without it. Melissa watched from the hallway, and Karen saw her daughter's face processing this new reality. A mother being investigated, a family situation spiraling, normal life fracturing, but also, and this was what Karen could see in Melissa's expression, something like respect. Her mother was answering for her choices. Her mother was not running. When the officers left, promising to be in touch once, they'd coordinated with the other stations. Karen sat with Melissa in the living room as, Darkness fell outside. What happens now? Melissa asked. I don't know, Karen admitted. Possibly criminal charges. Possibly a settlement. Probably community service. My life is probably going to get significantly more complicated before it gets better. But you're doing it anyway. Yes, Melissa leaned against her mother's shoulder. I'm sorry about the essays thing. And everything. I know that sounds weird to say right now, but I am. I'm sorry I disappointed you. Karen's eyes filled with tears. You didn't disappoint me, baby. I disappointed myself, and I projected that onto you. That's not your burden to carry. They sat together in the dark, neither of them speaking, while outside the world continued on. Somewhere in the city, Doug was probably telling the other managers about this unexpected turn of events. Somewhere, algorithms were notifying credit card companies about fraudulent activity being reported and reconciled. Somewhere, the machinery of consequence was grinding forward, and Karen sat in her house with her daughter, finally, facing the truth about who she'd become. But the worst was still coming, because tomorrow, she'd have to go to work and tell her boss. And the day after that, the intake interview with the public defender's office. And then the meetings with lawyers and insurance companies and corporate representatives who would calculate exactly what her dishonesty had cost everyone else. The unraveling had just begun, but at least now she was watching it happen with open eyes. The Benson and Cole marketing firm occupied the top 2 floors of the Meridian building downtown. Karen had worked there for 7 years. She knew every corner, every hallway, every person's coffee order. She'd celebrated promotions there, survived layoffs there, built a professional identity there. She walked into the lobby on Thursday morning knowing that identity was about to evaporate. Her boss, Richard, had called late Wednesday night. My office, 8 a.m. Don't be late. His tone suggested he already knew something was wrong. The elevator ride felt endless. Karen caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. She looked hollowed out. She'd barely slept. Her skin had taken on a waxy pallor, and her eyes had that hunted quality of someone bracing for impact. Richard's office overlooked the city skyline. It was meant to be impressive, but right now it felt like an execution chamber with a view. Richard sat behind his desk, his expression carefully neutral. He was 58, a divorced man with the polished veneer of someone who'd learned how to navigate corporate politics by being aggressively moderate about everything. He never took real positions. He never risked anything. "Sit down," he said. Karen sat. "I received a call from corporate legal this morning," Richard continued. "They were following up on a police inquiry regarding a fraudulent activity case. Your name came up." Karen's throat tightened. I turned myself involuntarily. "I don't care what you wanted," Richard interrupted. His voice remained level, but something cold had entered his eyes. "What I care about is that one of my senior marketing managers is currently under investigation for credit card fraud. Do you understand what that does to this company's reputation? What that does to my reputation as your supervisor?" "I understand, and You're fired," Richard said simply. "Effective immediately. You'll receive 2 weeks severance, which is frankly more generous than you deserve. Security will escort you to collect your personal items, and then you'll leave the building." The words landed in the space between them, and Karen felt something inside her simply break. Not emotionally, she was too numb for that, but structurally, something in her foundation fractured. "Richard, I appreciate you giving me a chance to explain. I made a mistake, a serious one, but I've cooperated fully with the investigation, and Are you seriously asking me to give you a pass because you confessed?" Richard leaned back in his chair, and there was something almost pitying in his expression now. "Karen, do you have any idea how many times I've heard that? Do you know how many employees have sat in that chair and told me they made a mistake and everything would be fine?" He stood and walked to his window, presenting her with his back. "The difference is most of them were lying. At least you're honest about your crimes. But honesty doesn't pay legal fees. Honesty doesn't protect the company from liability. And honesty doesn't help me explain to the board why I kept a thief on the payroll after learning about her activities." "I've already paid back everything I took," Karen said quietly. "And the other stations aren't pursuing charges if I complete restitution." "I don't actually care about the details of your legal situation," Richard said, turning back to face her. "What I care about is that you've become a liability. To this company, to this department, to me. And in business, liabilities get eliminated." He pressed a button on his intercom. "Send in security." Within minutes, a security guard, a young man named Derek, who'd always been friendly to Karen, who'd worked the same building for 4 years, stood awkwardly in the doorway. "She's being terminated," Richard said. "Please escort Ms. Richardson to collect her personal belongings and then see her out." Derek's expression shifted to sympathy. He'd heard then. Everyone probably knew already. The gossip mill in a corporate office moved at the speed of light. Karen's cubicle was exactly as she'd left it. 3 framed photos of Melissa at various ages, a small plant that had somehow survived on her neglect, and about 1,000 internal memos in various folders she'd never have time to read now. She didn't have much. She filled a small box, the photos, a few personal items, nothing that would hurt to lose. Her work laptop she left on the desk. The passwords to all her projects would be reset within hours. As she walked through the office, she felt the weight of every glance. Some were sympathetic. Most were a mix of curiosity and something darker, relief that it wasn't them. That they weren't the one being escorted out by security. Her colleague James, who sat across from her and who she'd snapped at more than once, caught her eye and gave her a small, sad nod. That almost made it worse, that someone she'd been cruel to could still offer kindness in her moment of humiliation. By the time she reached the elevator, her hands were shaking. Derek rode down with her in silence. Then, just as they reached the lobby, he said quietly, "For what it's worth, I think it took guts to turn yourself in." "Most people wouldn't," Karen couldn't respond. She just nodded and walked out into the daylight. The next 5 days were a blur of legal proceedings and increasingly bad news. The corporate representative from Shell sent formal documentation. There would be a civil settlement of $2,400. covering the amount she'd defrauded plus processing fees and investigation costs. The criminal charges were being reduced from felony fraud to misdemeanor theft, pending successful completion of a diversion program. She'd need to complete 40 hours of community service, attend mandatory counseling sessions, and submit to drug and alcohol testing. The Chevron and Speedway weren't pursuing charges, having confirmed that the amounts were minimal and her cooperation was full. But the job loss meant her income was gone. She had roughly $18,000 in savings. The settlement payment would be $2,400. Her mortgage was $1,800 per month. Property taxes, insurance, utilities, food, the math was getting uglier every day. She applied for unemployment benefits. The state would provide 308 hours per week. That was almost half of what she needed just for essential expenses. On Friday, she had her intake interview with a court-appointed public defender, a overworked woman named Sandra who'd seen 1,000 variations of Karen's story and treated her with the professional compassion of someone who couldn't afford to judge. The diversion program is actually good news, Sandra explained, walking through Karen's paperwork. It means you avoid a criminal record if you complete it successfully. You do the community service, the counseling, stay out of trouble for 1 year, and the charges get dismissed. How much is the counseling going to cost? Karen asked. Sandra's expression flickered. The program is subsidized. There will be some fees, but they're scaled to income. Given your current situation, you're looking at maybe $50 per session. 12 sessions minimum, $50. That seemed manageable until Karen really thought about it. $50 times 12 was $600, plus the settlement, plus losing $1,800 a month in income, plus the fact that no one was going to hire someone currently under investigation for fraud. What if I can't find a job? Karen asked. Sandra set down her pen and looked at Karen directly. Then you'll have to get creative. Some people do gig work, delivery services, day labor, that kind of thing. It's not glamorous, but it pays. Karen nodded slowly. Gig work. From a senior marketing manager to whatever jobs were available on demand platforms. The fall was starting to feel less like a stumble and more like a free fall. That evening, Melissa helped Karen set up profiles on 3 different gig economy apps: TaskRabbit, DoorDash, Amazon Flex. The interview questions were designed to weed out people with criminal backgrounds, and Karen answered them honestly. Felony fraud charges pending diversion. Community service. Counseling mandated. To her surprise, all 3 approved her. Apparently, misdemeanor theft with full cooperation wasn't disqualifying, only a red flag. The first job came through the next morning, helping someone move boxes from a garage into a storage unit. $15 an hour for 4 hours. $60? Karen accepted immediately. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be the invisible worker, to be the person helping someone else without any authority, without any status. The homeowner barely looked at her, just pointed at boxes and left her to work while they sat on the porch reading their phone. Her back hurt by the end of it. Her hands had blisters. She'd earned $60, which would pay for groceries but not the settlement payment due next week. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen accumulated jobs. She moved more boxes, delivered food, helped someone clean out a garage, assembled furniture, painted a basement. The work was relentless and exhausting and humbling. But something else happened too. She started noticing things she'd overlooked for years. The elderly man who ordered food delivery every day because he couldn't leave his apartment, she started sitting with him for a few minutes, making sure he ate. The single mother who was moving apartments and clearly stressed about the cost. Karen didn't charge for the overtime and didn't tell her. It wasn't redemption. Karen wasn't naive enough to think that small kindnesses erased significant wrongdoing. But it was something. A recognition that the world was full of struggling people and that her anger had blinded her to their existence. At Melissa's school, Karen was called in for a parent-teacher conference. The guidance counselor, Mr. Patterson, wanted to check in about how things were at home. Melissa mentioned some recent family changes, he said carefully. Is everything okay? Karen could have lied. 6 weeks into her new reality, Karen was scheduled for her final counseling session with Dr. Morrison. she'd completed 32 hours of community service. She'd accumulated $240 in gig work income. She'd paid the full settlement to Shell and begun making payments on the civil penalties from the other 2 stations. On the surface, she was following the script of redemption perfectly, but something was festering underneath. It started small, a comment from Melissa over dinner about how Karen seemed better now, which somehow made Karen feel worse. As if her suffering was supposed to be performative, as if she was supposed to emerge from this experience as some kind of inspirational figure. Then there was the food bank supervisor, who'd started treating Karen as a special project. "You're so dedicated," the woman kept saying. "So committed to making this right. You should really consider volunteering here permanently after your service hours are complete." Karen realized with growing discomfort that people were beginning to construct a narrative around her, the woman who'd made a mistake and was now redeeming herself through hard work and sacrifice. It was a comfortable narrative. It let people feel good about not judging her too harshly, but it wasn't true. Karen wasn't good. She was terrified. "I want to talk about something," Karen said during her final session with Dr. Morrison. "I feel like I'm being praised for basic human decency, like I'm supposed to feel proud of myself for not running away from consequences I created." Dr. Morrison set down her pen. "How does that make you feel?" "Angry," Karen said. "Actually, I'm furious. I'm furious that I can ruin someone's day by stealing from them and then be celebrated as inspirational for admitting I did it. That's not justice. That's just me getting to feel like I'm the hero of my own redemption story." "And what do you think actual justice looks like?" Dr. Morrison asked. Karen was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I don't think I'm qualified to decide that. And maybe that's the point. I don't get to decide. I just have to live with the consequences of what I did and accept that I might not ever feel like this is resolved." Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. "That's probably the most mature thing you've said in our 6 weeks together." After the session, Karen drove to the one place she'd been avoiding, the original Shell station where everything had unraveled. It was mid-afternoon, relatively quiet. She parked and sat in her car for 20 minutes, gathering nerve. Finally, she went inside. The same clerk with the purple streaks in his hair was working. He didn't recognize her at first, then his eyes widened with something. Fear? "Recognition? Is Doug here?" Karen asked quietly. "In the back." "I'll get him." Doug emerged within a minute, and his expression shifted from professional politeness to genuine surprise. "Karen, this is unexpected." "I wanted to come back," Karen said. "Not to ask for anything. Just to apologize directly to you and to thank you for not pressing charges." "I know you didn't have to do that." Doug gestured for her to step to the side, away from the counter. They stood near the beverage coolers, surrounded by humming refrigeration and the mundane reality of a convenience store. "You want to know why I didn't press charges?" Doug asked. "Yes." "Because I've been where you are," Doug said. "Not exactly. I was 23 and stealing from a grocery store where I worked. But the feeling is the same, that desperation. That conviction that the world has wronged you so badly that you're justified in breaking the rules." Karen didn't say anything. She just listened. "I got caught," Doug continued. "A manager found cash missing from my register. But instead of going to corporate, she called me into her office and asked me a simple question. Do you want to keep doing this, or do you want to change?" I changed. It took years to actually change, to get past the anger and entitlement and see myself clearly. But that moment was where it started. "Why are you telling me this?" Karen asked. "Because when you came back that day, when you confessed instead of fighting, I saw the same opening that my manager saw in me. A person who could potentially choose different. And I thought someone gave me that chance. Maybe I should give it to someone else." Karen felt something break open in her chest. What if I'd let you down? What if I'd just disappeared and proven you wrong? Then I would have been disappointed, but not surprised, Doug said simply. But I have a responsibility to live according to my own values, not according to your predicted outcomes. I chose to believe in the possibility of your change. What you do with that belief is yours to decide. After leaving the station, Karen drove to the speedway where she'd made her second fraudulent claim. Janet was working the night shift. When she saw Karen, she smiled. A genuine, warm smile that Karen didn't deserve, but accepted. "I came to apologize again," Karen said, "and to ask if there's anything I can do to make it right." "Beyond the money," Janet leaned against the counter. "My mom got sick," she said. "Really sick. Hospitalization, surgery, the whole thing. And you know what I thought about during all that? Not the $35 you stole from me. I thought about how small that was in the context of actual struggles." "That doesn't mean what I did was okay," Karen said. "No, it doesn't," Janet agreed. "But it does mean I've learned to put things in perspective. Look, you made a choice to be honest about your mistakes. Most people don't. That matters more than the money to me." Karen started crying, not the controlled, performative tears she'd become good at, but actual, messy, full-bodied sobs. Janet handed her napkins and just let her feel it. The breakthrough moment came 3 weeks later. During a community service shift, Karen was sorting donations when she found something. A box of children's books, well-loved and well-worn. As she ran her fingers over the spines, she noticed one in particular. The Tale of Despereaux. It had been one of Melissa's favorite books as a child. Karen had read it to her dozens of times. In that moment, she remembered a specific passage, something about how forgiveness is the greatest power, but not forgiveness of others. Forgiveness of yourself. Karen had spent 6 weeks trying to earn redemption through suffering, through work, through admissions of fault. But she'd been doing it for the wrong reason, not to become a better person, but to escape the uncomfortable reality of what she actually was. A person who had stolen. A person who had been cruel. A person who had weaponized love to control others. Those things didn't disappear because she completed community service or made restitution payments. They just became things she'd done. The question wasn't whether she could forgive herself. The question was whether she could accept that she might never feel fully forgiven and live anyway. That evening, she called her ex-husband Marcus for the first time since their marriage ended. "Hi," she said when he answered, his voice confused at the unfamiliar number. "It's Karen. I know this is strange. I wanted to hear your voice and tell you something." "Okay," Marcus said cautiously. "What?" "I wanted you to know that I'm not calling to apologize again or to try to process our past or anything therapeutic like that," Karen said. "I'm calling because I realized I spent so long being angry at you for not meeting my emotional needs that I never asked what your actual needs were. And I wonder sometimes if you're okay, if you found happiness, if you forgave me or if you just moved on and never thought about me again." There was a long pause. Then Marcus said, "I'm okay. I'm engaged. Getting married next spring?"